Oh, he's watching.
Oh, he was going to come, but change to
Oh no, here he goes.
he is coming.
No.
Plan. Wasn't the plan?
We should invite Clint to the front too. Clint from...
Clint, would you like to come up the front
No,
too?
it's meant to be community. Alex is leading the community,
Yeah, I know, that's what I've done.
but the whole task force hasn't been invited, so...
So then
Exactly, that was the point.
Oh, is that the
deal with
point? Okay, look, we're getting some... maybe it is just Alex up here. Are you objecting to the other ones, Debbie?
I'm just saying that it's in fairness to the task force, Alex was asked to represent them as the mayor, but
Okay.
otherwise everybody should have been and they haven't, so I don't want to upset anyone.
Okay, welcome, Alex.
Thank
You're
you.
very welcome to our council.
Thank you. I love coming
Rick
to
wants to go home, but, you know, you've arrived.
I'll wait.
I appreciate that. Ina mana, ina reo, ina karanga rangataha. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. That is referring to being in the presence of prestigious persons.
Oh,
Who are they?
do you include Rick and I in that?
Depends how this conversation goes, Mr. Chairman.
Discounts me then.
So who's taking the floor here, you or Tom?
I would not want to take the floor back from Her Worship.
So, Alex, the floor is yours for a minute. We have a paper in front of us, what you need to
Yeah, you have
address.
a paper in front of you. What I wanted to do, it's my pleasure to be here on behalf of the Tukituki Water Taskforce, and I actually just want to pick up on something that Councillor Bailey said earlier. I'm a fan of community-led decision-making, and that really resonated with me, Councillor, and that's part of the reason why I'm here representing the community that is on the taskforce. So what is probably, I'll pick up on a couple of things that are maybe not in the paper. The first one is that the Water Task Force is comprised of representatives from my district council, from regional council, from Te Tai Whenua or Tamatea, Fish and Game, Forest and Bird, the Surface Water Consent Holders Users Group, Ruataniwha Water Users Group, representative from Tikakino and Onga Onga Community, and also Tranche 2 applicants. So we have a broad spectrum of representatives from across the community that are there and part of the task force. And which means that we're actually in a situation similar, I suppose, to how Tank has come through, and I must congratulate you on moving that through today, of community-led solutions. And the task force is there to work through the science, work through the issues, and work through solutions in the catchment. And part of that is how do we get through the roadblocks from short term to long term. We've had quite a number of conversations about short term to long term. And the nub of the issue that has brought me to the table today is about one part of the Tukituki catchment plan, which talks about the dates of implementation of the low flow mechanisms in the Tukituki River. And I'll just jump to that there. So basically a conversation from the community about the timeline to adapt to these river flows being too short, and that increased frequency and longevity of water take bans for those consent holders exacerbated from November through March, with the associated flow-on effects of those impacts. And reliability becomes the nub of the issue. So it's actually not about the volume of water that is there, it's actually about that ability to rely on water coming through. So the nub of this request is about seeking a change to timing, not a change to flow levels. And I just want to quickly go back to, we've had a conversation about this previously, and there are a number of things that can be done around solutions for conserving water and making an impact in the catchment. And you all will be familiar with all of those things I've put up there. But it's been 12 months since I sat here previously and discussed the timing of these low flow mechanisms in the catchment plan. And since that time, a large amount of activity, of community-led, community-driven activity has happened, contributing to how we're going to be resilient about water. So there was a challenge from this table at that time 12 months ago about how is Central Hawke's Bay stepping up, and this is the evidence, the list of things that are going on. And I want to pick up in particular point number 4, which is the Surface Water Consent Holders Conservation Plan. So if you're familiar with the catchment plan, you'll know that it is the surface water consent holders who really bear the brunt of the timing of these river low flows, where they will have increased ban times through the summer season to try and maintain river flows. And actually, you guys, having been part of the tank process, know some of the science that came through tank about whether those how much impact those surface water takes actually have on river flow, and that they are they're being fed to the lion almost. But that point there is that this group of surface water consent holders have come together, and with the support of the Regional Council, to do a research project, and are working together on what is termed a conservation plan. And with all of those, it's around about 50, depending on whether you take it as individual people or individual consents. And they have come up with a phased plan of how they can conserve water by sharing volumes, sharing timing, rationing, and smoothing out of water takes over the summer period. They've also identified the shortfall of water that they have. There's no way to completely cover that from the existing consents. A very positive, community-driven, collaborative way of moving forward. But I have to say it's not the complete solution for what we've got. And the other points there that are worth picking up are that there are high flow allocations in the plan to be taken, that can be applied for and taken to use in on-farm water storage, and there is a small number of those that are currently in sort of design construction phase, and about half of that high flow allocation across the whole catchment has been consented. In the Upper Tuki, it is completely allocated. And obviously, another really important thing here has actually been the coming together of the Water Taskforce together under the chairmanship of Debbie, and support from the Regional Council. So where we are is the request from the task force is a little bit muddied because of how things have transpired a little bit with forest and bird. But ultimately looking for support around the creating space, I suppose, creating space to allow community to come together and find the solutions to take us from short-term thinking to long-term thinking. Because if we don't, actually the risks are real. There are short-term actions that will be taken, which are short-term solutions, which will actually jeopardise our position in the long run. And constraints on reliability of water actually drive land use change. And what I mean by that is that if these guys who have apples or crops along the plains close to the river, if they can't guarantee that they are going to have access to at least some amount of water for a continuous period of time, they make choices about that land use. And so they trade off and choose another type of land use. And there are examples of property owners who make a choice between planting a vegetable crop and actually knowing they haven't got the reliability of the water, so they decide not to do that and graze some heifer replacements or something like that on the land instead. So there is the opportunity here for actually driving what I believe you probably think is the reverse land use for what we're actually trying to achieve. And the final thing, the final risk of not doing anything here is actually that without creating space for community to create solutions, the little guys get left behind. And what I mean by that is if we go ahead with the context that we've got, with this timing, the owners, the properties, the businesses that have got the deepest pockets and the biggest bits of land actually have the ability to create their own resilience, but the little guys get left behind. So the golf club who needs to water their greens, or the small landowner, the block holders that have got 20, 30, 40, 50, up to 100 hectares, they haven't got the capacity to do their own on-farm water storage or things like that. So there's actually, the constraint of time creates quite a risk around reversing what I think is probably the value set that was set up with the plan change. And I think that probably sums it up. The wording of the request is attached to the report, and I'm happy to participate in questions if that's what you want to do, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alex. Tom, do you wish to add anything to this?
The only thing to add, Chair, is probably due to some deficiencies in my report writing. There's been some concern that the request from the task force is for some reduction in the low flows, and I just want to confirm that it's simply a deferral in the timeframes in which the low flow levels are increased. So I just apologise for that confusion. And I think there's also been some strong feedback in terms of the task force was not meant to get straight into the policy area. And just to reiterate, my understanding from the discussion that we had, that I observed at the committee or at the task force, was that this was really much more focused on the fact that this was seen as an impediment to better decision making. So that's why the request has been made.
Chair, could I just add a couple of additional points as well? Just draw the committee's attention to the fact that in this year's long-term plan, the council identified that there are some shortcomings with respect to our knowledge of the Ruataniwha groundwater system, and has determined to make some investment by way of rebuilding the groundwater model, updating our monitoring network, and most significantly undertaking the electromagnetic survey of the subsurface. That work has commenced, but will take approximately 2 years to be completed. At the end of that period, we'd expect to have significantly greater knowledge, not only about the resource, but around the options for managing the necessary constraints on the take of that resource. Included in that work is our investigation into managed aquifer recharge. In that respect, I would note that the Council's own Plan B, post-Ruataniwha, is really only getting underway now. So the work that we're doing in response to, I guess, the failure of the RWSS to be a timely solution to the water management challenges of Plan Change 6 is relatively emergent and still has a couple of years to run. And the request here does align to some extent with that notion that we've got more work to do to better understand how to manage this resource best.
Now, I'd like to take questions, and could we keep it down to questions and not comment, because there will be plenty of time for comment afterwards. So are there any questions for any one of the parties that are present here? Tom?
I have two questions. The survey or assessment of the Tukituki no Anga Anga, when will those, maybe I missed you saying it, but when will those results be, when will we know the extent of that issue?
So that is going to be reported to the task force next week. We're actually meeting again next week. But at a high level, we've had about 2/3 of the residents across the two villages respond. And of those, probably half have got some resilience issues that may need some support. But that's about the extent of the information that I have at the moment. So next week it will be reported to the task force.
My second question has to do with the linkage that has been put on this request between Tranche 2 and the core request, which has to do with flow limits. It seems to me the two are completely separate, as Forest and Bird has argued in its follow-up letter. And so the suggestion that there is a deal to be struck where something valuable is gained by not proceeding with Tranche 2, and therefore something valuable should be given up in exchange, is a sort of a falsehood, basically. Do you agree with that?
I think it is the result of what is community-led decision making, is about how to bring all those parties together, and you know, your view that maybe that's trading off between things that not necessarily of equal value, but that's for the task force to bring forward. And you could say that they need to be dealt with slightly in isolation, and if I was to offer anything to the table, it would be actually that the task force needs to come back with a bit more guidance around how we're going to land on that based on obviously the dialogue that's come from the National Office. But I think the core issue around the support for space and the timeframes is still there, but there's probably some guidance the task force could still provide as we get together again next week.
Peter.
Thank you, Chair. So just for clarity, and this is really a question for you, I think, Tom, the only way that we could give effect to the request that we've received is through a limited plan change, and there are a couple of ways that could be done, and the cost, it looks to me, is in the order of $350,000 to $400,000, including our staff time cost, and that might buy 2 years.
So I just need to check. It sounds like the total of two.
220 to 350.
Those are either ors. Yeah. So
220 to 350.
Yeah.
And that's assuming there's no appeal.
Yeah, and so effectively what the committee may decide to do is initiate that process and test how hotly it will be contested, and and I think that's why the point around better clarity and more conversation around the task force to round out some of the concerns that have been raised already. It might be a fast to fail approach, but it might not be.
So just following from that, with the time involved, even in a plan change, a limited plan change, emergency plan change, whatever you'd call it, there would be no relief in the current or in the upcoming summer season, correct?
No.
And hence why we are continuing with the conservation plans and things. So.
Ollie, you have a question?
You realise there's not much Māori-owned land on the Rotaniwha Plains, but have you got any real idea of how this will adversely affect many Māori families if this is not put through?
So I think there's a couple of things. There's obviously the economic flow on in terms of employment associated with the land, and there are some examples that are fairly direct about businesses that are directly employing people. But I think there's also the flip side is that by creating a bit more space, we have the Tai Whenua Tamatea really closely beside us, and there's actually the opportunity to work more about what is provision for tangata whenua and solutions as we move forward.
I want to just pause and go just out. Jenny, you represent the Tai Whenua down there. Is that a true statement? That you support?
But we were doing questions.
Yeah, well, I'm deviating, Councillor, which is my privilege. Can you just give a
Leadership.
Yes.
Since that was mentioned, I just want a clarification.
Okay, so we actually have tangata whenua on the ground involved right across the board up to the task force. So we've got Auntie Willie Wilcox's daughter from the Waipawa end. We've got Joe Heperi from the Takapau end. And we've got Marge Happy, who sits on the Māori Standing Committee, who did all the water quality and water testing with whānau right along all the rivers. So it's a really good engagement, because the Tai Whenua down home is a collective of the Nine Marae there, and that's how we engage the whānau. So, yes. So you, just for clarification, you support Alex's position? Absolutely support Alex's position, okay. and I've got that from whānau back home. And just to reiterate what Alex said, but from a tangata whenua point of view, ahi kā, the people that live and wake up there every day and work there every day and see those rivers every day and work with these people and these businesses, ko mai rano, are actually involved in the task force. And that's really the most important thing for us, is that people on the ground, just like was said this morning, can apply and see the solutions and develop the solutions for that to happen. And the interesting thing about people that work on the ground, that live next to it and with it, they see straight away the results of whatever solutions they apply. They don't have to wait for a report. So absolutely support it.
I can confirm that.
Questions now. I've cancelled those. Let's go to Mana Whenua had a right. Paul, question.
Thank you, Chair. The cost of between $220,000 and $350,000 Dollars, Tom, Chair, sorry, through you, Tom. What budget's that going to come from?
Mine.
From your budget, so it'll come from your resources?
Yes.
So there would obviously be those resources would have to be taken off somewhere else. Where else would they be taken from?
So that we'll just have to have a hard look at our work program, but it's something we've done in the past. It's something we did in respect of the oil and gas plan change. So it's just look, we operate at the direction of this committee. So
given the current future work program, that's likely to come off the future plan changes like the Mohaka plan change?
Not necessarily in terms of, I don't see it as causing any delay to the Mohaka plan change, because through the processes that we've been through PC6, through TANK, we have, I think, committed to doing some very strong design work with Mohaka at the front end, and that's where we don't think that will necessarily be very heavy on monetary resources, but it will be probably deeper with engagement. So I don't see this as being a threat to the Mohaka plan change.
The timely completion of the Mohaka plan change?
Look, I mean, the sooner we rush into the Mohaka plan change, the longer it will take.
Okay.
Neil, then back to Tom.
Sorry, Chair, I have further questions.
Oh, did you?
Is that all right by you? I can come back.
Give it to Neil. I think that's right.
We'll come back to you, Paul. Just, he's been waiting and I've been ignoring him. So we'll come, then Tom, then you.
Thanks, Alex. Can I just take you to the Forest and Bird letter? I'm assuming you've received a copy of that letter. Just in their third paragraph, it appears to me that they've left the door open to consideration, where they say, detail illustrating how the proposal would ensure the life-supporting capacity of freshwater is safeguarded, how adverse effects could be avoided, remedied or mitigated. So I've got a couple of questions in that regard. Firstly, the branch representatives, are you able to say what their level of commitment to their local community is in regard to the proposal? In other words, are they now overridden and withdrawing, or is the National Office in accedance? The second question is, given that mitigation is at the bottom line of the ongoing forest and bird opportunity, are you aware, or have there been discussions with Tranche 2 applicants to withdraw their applications?
So neither of those things have been a topic that we've discussed, and I can't speak for the members of the task force individually like that. And as I said, we as a task force need to meet again next week where we can discuss some of those things. So technically no answer to either of those questions.
Just by way of continuance, it occurs to me that the door is open, and I appreciate the desire to uncouple the Tranche 2 scenario, but then it's recoupled, in my view, by that paragraph around mitigation. Tranche 2 clearly is a chance to mitigate, and it'd be interesting to pursue what Tranche 2 applicants, whether they will play ball with their community. There's probably still no answer to that apart from that the task force needs to discuss it again. That's right.
And so, yes, you could decouple and then recouple, but actually I think the support from this table, actually just in principle that you're willing to support the task force about what a plan change could look like, would be a really great step forward. Okay. And recognising there's still some dialogue about specifically what that would look like.
Tom, and then to you, Paul.
I just, for James, I guess, under plan changes and territorial changes, there's such a thing as a private plan change that can be initiated by whomever. Does that apply here as well? Could a group of irrigators say, we want to initiate a private plan change to suspend or change or whatever some aspect of Plan Change 6?
Off the top of my head, the short answer is yes. The costs of that would be borne
by them,
including the cost impost on the council in going through that process, because obviously we would need to be participants.
So it is conceivable that someone who is profiting heavily from current irrigation rights might see it in their interest to file a private plan change to accomplish this goal?
Yes, in terms of, I guess, the funding of the process, but I would note that I don't think anyone in their right mind would initiate that without the comfort that this council was not going to fight it, because obviously, as
For Forest and Bird or anyone else?
well, I think as the regulatory authority, if it did not have our endorsement, it would have a very, very slim chance of proceeding. So I think the support of this council for it is a precursor. It may make a difference in terms of where those costs fall.
Thank you, Chair. Alex, the Surface Water Conservation Plan, has that been completed yet?
Yes, it has, and I believe it was endorsed on the 19th of November by the group. Yeah, Alistair's nodding to me.
So, but we haven't seen a copy of that yet.
Not at this table, no.
Not at this table, right? Other question is was there any discussion with the group around, because you've been prepared to do a deal with the Tranche 2, was there any discussion around perhaps recompensing the residents of Onga and Tukituki who have been disadvantaged by over recent years by the irrigation coming in?
Short answer, no.
No?
Because we're still scoping the level of that issue and what it would take to remediate that.
Okay. Another further question, Chair. I suppose it's for Tom. If we were going to go down this route and consider doing a plan change to Plan Change 6, there would be a number of other issues we'd consider doing at the same time?
That hasn't been the request, and I think this council has always given, in previous discussions around here, is that the focus of any plan change would be incredibly narrow and focused, and certainly not traverse anything in relation to water quality or that regard. So unless you have a specific, I know that that there are probably things that would be nice to tidy up in the plan change, but it's not proposed to broaden it beyond anything.
I was just going through, I came across some papers put out by an outfit called Greening Tukituki, which we're part of. And part of their solution is to look at doing a plan change so that they can deal with nitrogen, the overuse of nitrogen in the catchment. So there's a whole bunch of issues. If you're going to do a plan change for one thing, you might as well do the whole heap.
We're acutely aware of all of those issues, and I guess that would have significant cost and timetable implications and massively complicate this plan change exercise. I mean, we could do open heart surgery on the Tukituki plan change, and we'll need to at some point. Just the question is whether or not now is the time for that, because that would have a major displacement effect on the council's resources.
Rick?
I've got 3 questions. With regard to 11.1, the original request of the influx of step-by-step minimum time to 2023. This was reduced to 2 summers. Please explain that out with particularities. I've got it, but I want you just to tell me what you understand it to mean.
So the original motion that was discussed was around the flow implications of 2023. So if you're familiar with the catchment plan, you'll know that there is one level of minimum flow introduced in 2018 and another in 2023.
Correct.
So the conversation was that we need to hang fast to the 2023 target. So the original recommendation that was put to the task force, well, the motion that was put said, could we make it that we try to hit the 2023 target instead of the 2018? And part of the discussion and sharing of perspectives in the group saw the trade-off down to include a shorter time period of relief to 2 years.
So is that, let's try and put it around it, are you saying that the 2018 becomes 2020 and the final thing is 2023? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, following the 2021 summer.
It's not clear from that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that what it's saying?
Yes.
Yeah. To defer the 2018 to 2020 and maintain the 2023. Okay. The second question I have is that it's now the intention of the resolution to reinforce the second step and we've got about the Tranche 2 consents being publicly notified. What is the connection there? There's no obvious connection. So what is it? higher?
So a connection on the level of public interest and the perceived value of that to the community that was discussed by the task force.
Look, I might just add that I think part of the linkage that's being made here is understandable in the context of having to respond to increased minimum flows by water users in the catchment, and the concern that including these new minimum flow requirements, will be exacerbated in the scale of their challenge if a further 15 million cubic metres of water is abstracted from the groundwater resource. Let's say that process results in consents being granted next year, then in the 2019-20 irrigation season, potentially there's a further exacerbation on the challenge.
But it's not clear what the connection is being sought by the people who've written the resolutions. I mean, you have to interpret it, and I just want to know what was the connection.
So, well, to be fair, probably linked on what James has just said, that we're looking at that the perception from the community is that all of these things are connected about how water is used, and that they are relevant to each other because they're connected.
So it just seems you're making one of them. The other question I've got, which is, this is all about us, our view, but I'd like to ask you a question. What do you think the river would think about this?
Yeah, total.
So my view on that is that we need to make the best long-term decisions for the health and viability of the river that we can. And right now we're trapped in a time space that says there is potential for short-term thinking to make things worse rather than better if we don't adjust our thinking to the long term. And the second thing is that the science and the work around how those flows actually connect to the level of the river, the thinking of that has actually changed and evolved, and the tank group have seen some of that evolution of thinking about that and the impact that surface water takes actually have on river flow. And in all seriousness, I think that if there was the taps turned off on everybody tomorrow, the river level would continue to go down because it's Mother Nature that's feeding it. And so there is some question, there's some lack of clarity about that science actually about what that impact would be on the river.
Well, I've questioned that. So if the taps are all left open, would the river level go down faster?
I suppose that logic follows. But it's how big, how fast, how big is that difference?
Any more questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Tanya.
Between we made some so proposals to defer the minimum flows were, or the effectiveness of the minimum flows were put to this committee previously and were not passed. I'm just trying to get my head around what's changed between the last resolutions we considered and did not pass about deferring the implementation of the minimum flows and today. What has happened to encourage us to change our mind on that, on a previous resolution on that? I'm just trying to understand what is it that is significant that has changed. If someone on staff is able to assist, I'd be grateful.
I'll have a go at that, and then maybe Alex, you might like to add. One of the things that was raised last time was a perception that this community had done nothing to prepare for the minimum flow increases and was standing like possums in the headlights, really. And I think the point of Alex's presentation, and I'm certainly, from my perspective, seeing a significant level of activity over the last 12 months since this issue was last considered by the community to grip up the issues and to respond to it. So there is an awful lot of activity that has been undertaken, and what we're seeing is best endeavours by the water users to prepare for change and to accommodate that, and I think that has changed our perception of the circumstances. Alex, is that?
That pretty much sums it up. I suppose the community is on the move and trying to work on solutions for the best for the community, and particularly I think the work around the surface water consent holders and the study that has been done on the impact of their water takes on the bigger picture, and now consequently the conservation plan that they've put together is certainly a significant step forward in best endeavours, as you describe it, James, to at least start getting to that sustainable point.
And in regards to the river, what would the river think? For the whānau back home, Tanya, it has been the first time that they've been actually taken seriously sitting at the tables with the resource consent holders, which goes on a process of first in, first serve. So, I mean, that's the reality. But they actually, the table has become filled with quite a bit more of integrity. And the whānau appreciate being at that level. It's not just about jobs, it's actually being at that level, discussing the issues of the river and working through the challenges of that in the last 12 months has been, actually it's been quite uplifting for the whānau, and it's driven by the concern for the rivers. And then the other excitement that the whānau have is the science program. You know, Papa Tuanuku is actually going to get a scan, and the whānau are going to be involved in that, and so it's quite a different approach to the group of people and the thinking at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I just support that, because I met with Kaumātua from Tamatea last night at my place, and they didn't have the information before, and now they said to the chairman of the Tai Whenua, Roger Marker, that they backed this 100%.
So I just want to clarify, the question was, I think, posed by Rick, what does the awa think about this? My understanding is that the minimum flows were being implemented in 2018 to better protect the river and ecosystems, etc. I'm hearing reasons why people might suffer and find it difficult, but I'm not hearing evidence of what is the impact of a further delay on the awa.
So two things on that, Tanya. I think what Alex's presentation outlined, and you may not have been able to see it from where you are, is that there are a whole bunch of actions around conservation. So in terms of the effect on the river, what we are saying is that the package of activity which is now underway is going to have a positive effect on flows in the river. And I guess the second point is to greater quantify specifically what these delays will mean in terms of the water body. That's advice that we would need to procure necessarily as part of the plan change, including a Section 32 analysis. So should the committee wish to go down this path, there is a body of evidence that we will bring forward in due course, and you'll have to consider that before getting to a point of notifying a plan change.
So I just want to clarify. So my recollection previously was that if we were to consider a plan change to defer the minimum flow, that there was concerns about other participants in this plan change process previously. Am I right in understanding that Ngāti Kahungunu Iwi had and others had been involved in litigation around Plan Change 6?
Yes, I think that's correct.
Yes, so what is the likely impact, or what do you think is likely to happen if we go with a proposed, exploring a proposed plan change to defer the minimum flows? What parties do you think are likely to take offence with that?
Well, we will have to identify, as per, we did with the tank plan change earlier today, the affected parties. There'll be a pre-consultation, particularly with iwi authorities. So all of those steps would lie before us. Naturally, we haven't invested the resource in undertaking all of that at this point, because we have no idea whether this committee has an appetite for responding to this request from the Taskforce. And until you give us that indication that you're prepared to entertain a plan change here, we wouldn't want to embark on that work.
Sorry, and if I could just add, Tanya, I think just in terms of it may be for this particular case that the committee takes I think I mentioned it earlier, fast failure approach, and so that if it does indicate its support to give this a go, and I suppose I note that one of the material changes is that we have a wider group of stakeholders sitting around the task force who have made this request, and so and we have some some useful feedback from some representatives associated with them that can be worked on. But look, if we go down this path and there is a good early engagement and we get a strong indication that it's going to be fought tooth and nail, then I think we will be reporting that back to this committee as quickly as possible.
And further to that note, Te Tai Whenua Tamatea is a subsidiary of Ngāti Kāinga Iwi Inc. And we have our own representatives there. We've learnt from the experience of the Board of Inquiry, and there is opportunities, especially how this task force is set up, much like TANK, but better, I think, that we can fully engage Ngāti Kāinga Iwi specialist skills, along with our board representatives, as a way of mitigating that. We want to encourage participation at the task force level, because it's about everybody and their relationship to the river. So I'm fully confident that Ngāti Kāinga Iwi and Te Tai Whenua Tamatea will work quite closely together from now, as opposed to the Board of Inquiry, which came in after the fact, to manage and mitigate future litigation. Because at the end of the day, our whānau representative is on that board, and the decisions that they make and the directions they take will be managed much that way as well as on the ground.
Okay, we have a whole bunch of, we have 4 options here, and I'm not that happy the way they're worded, really. But I suppose the first thing that we really need to decide is, it says decline the task force request. I'd rather put, do we accept the task force request? So, because, I think people get confused how they vote if you say that. So, do we change that? Do we accept, and then we can follow, then everything follows on from there. James, is that?
So these were either or recommendations. So either you decline or seek further clarification, or essentially.
Yes, but to put a motion to I decline, it's a bit complicated.
No. We would be expecting that if the mood of the committee and someone was prepared to move 2.3, which is direct staff, that would become the recommendation.
Okay. So
I suggest, Chair, that you take the lead by moving a resolution that you think you'd like the committee to consider.
Okay, then I will move 2.3. Do I have a second? Cora will second it. Yeah. And I will speak to it.
Hang on, is it seconded?
Yes.
I second it.
Just a clarification, do you need everything after the word plan change process? Is it the desire of this committee to complicate it with tranche 2?
Forgot what we got. No, we don't need all that.
Well, look, I'd make the observation that the tranche 2 process has been noted is on its own track. What this enables us to do is get on with the work on the presumption, and I think it's a very sound presumption, that tranche 2 will be notified, but then, of course, not proceed until that has been settled, rather than hold this whole thing up until such time as we definitively know that tranche 2 has been notified.
So why don't you just put a period behind the word process? Direct staff to scope and initiate a preliminary plan change process, period. That's the decision.
Yep. That's the decision.
Is it not?
Yep. Full stop.
That's fine. We're just responding to the nature of the request from the task force.
And would that still be seconded by somebody?
Toro still seconds it. So I wish to speak. Excuse me, I'm just in the middle of flowing here.
Have you accepted the amendment, Chair?
Yes, I have.
Thank you.
So, Alex, this is a mess. This is an absolute mess. We have first in, first served, as Jenny's pointed to, and I always, whenever I think of that, I think of Rick's milkshake analogy, you know, the people in those small villages, and I would suggest the people even in Waipaka around Waipawa have got short to medium straws, and there's 6 or 7 blokes out there that have got very long straws. It's a mess. It should never have happened. We've had over-consenting. We've had outrageous behaviour by past councillors over-consenting. We've had outrageous legislation that even agrees with this, and it's sort of part of our entire society at the moment. That the ones who are the smartest are taking more. We have a huge gap in our wealthy and our poor people. And somehow we've got to change it. But it is the legislation we're working with. It's poor legislation, but it's what we're working with, and we've got ourselves in the stock because of it. And I needed to say that because it's just those legacy issues, and we have heaps of legacy issues that we're dealing with. But having said that, there were a bunch of people who put a dam project together to try and mitigate this. It now appears pretty obvious, and that failed for all sorts of reasons, and we were as a council uncomfortable about putting our 80 million in, a majority of us, and of course it failed because Forest and Bird took it through the courts over the land. So we now have a community that could be in a big drought, not this year more than likely, could be in a very, very difficult situation. So putting aside the rights and wrongs, putting aside the legacy issues, putting aside everything, I think we have a responsibility to give this community a little bit of time. And I spoke about this before, and we failed before, but I have to say we only just failed because of the 80% rule. Now, mana whenua, the people who live in this region and have lived there for 1,000 years are supporting the council and the other people that live there, the Pākehās that live there, to say, let's have a little bit more time to try and sort this out. It's not a big deal for us. And sure, it won't be perfect. It might be okay this year, but if we get a big drought, it will be a terrible situation for the river. But at least we will get a sustainable position that all the people there who live there will have worked out and come back to us. And in that, you know, we've got this tranche 2, which is just, you know, ridiculous situation, which our scientists never agreed to. And we have a few people that are taking a huge amount of the water, and that's not sustainable going forward over the next 20 years either. So I do support this. We have to give this community time to sort this out, and give our own people time to help sort this out. And it's a big cost to our wider community to do this. But that's my position. Toro?
Yeah, first off, as the chair of the Tangata Whenua group, I have to take cognizance of what the Tangata Whenua of the area say. Secondly, I have listened to Alex's undertaking. They're going to get something together and sort this thing out, so you need time to do that. Thirdly, we've had a karakia, and Papa Tuanuku is going to look after you for the next few years. It's going to get a lot wetter, so you're going to have plenty of water. Okay? And the karakia was here, tio he huka, okay? So the Māori calendar says wet weather's coming.
Good luck with that.
I think that's right. Tom?
So I will speak against the motion. I find it disingenuous to be staring all this time at the last bullet there, the little guys get left behind, when in fact the reality of the situation is that a very small number of irrigators, very small number of irrigators in Central Hawke's Bay are holding the rest of your community to hostage. And you're bending over for it. I'm shocked. As has been said earlier with the straw analogy, you've got literally a half a dozen or so folks there with a gigantic straw sucking the water out of this aquifer. to the detriment of the rest of the community. And they're basically leading the charge to come in here and say, give us more time. These are supposedly smart people who would have read the Board of Inquiry decision. I reread it over the weekend. It must have said every single time that the issue of more water came up was that, well, this only works if you have the dam. So for people to feel that, to claim that they are now need a little time, have now awakened to the situation they're in, beggars belief. I've been waiting for improvement in the Tukituki, I don't know whether other people have been, for the last 10 years. And for 10 years, there's been zero improvement, partly because of inept council behavior in Central Hawke's Bay, present company excluded. But that's what the history has been. And nothing has happened to improve this. So I'm not prepared to wait another 1 year or 1 month. I think this, what has to happen down there is the community has to realize that it is grandfathering in inappropriate land use that is having detrimental effects on the entire community. And that's the nub of the situation. And I'm not about to vote to grandfather those present practices into place. It's inappropriate use. I don't see those users making any concessions. And to Rick's point, that's what the deal was. Oh, Tranche 2 is really going to scare the pants off of you environmentalists. You better trade something to get rid of that. Well, Tranche 2 is never going to happen. Never going to happen. So it's a bogus premise from this get-go. So there we stand. You take that out of the equation, and then you have to ask, okay, well, if there is a deal to be made, and the deal involves relaxing one of the most fundamental provisions of Plan Change 6 in terms of water quality, what does anybody get in return for that? Well, I haven't seen anything. And so for me, at the very least, this is a premature proposition, but I actually think it's probably a pernicious one. So I'm not sure I would vote for it, 6 months from now either. But for sure not today, when I don't see a bunch of water users who are getting fat off of abusing the water in their region, hold hostage the rest of their region. I'm not going to vote for that.
Thank you, Finn.
Thank you, Chair. I am going to vote for that on the basis that these so-called fat dairy farmers, and I've seen a few dairy farmers, not too many of them get fat, they're working too hard, but had an opportunity taken off them to do something about the issue that Councillor Belford raises. So around 60% of that water was signed up voluntarily to Ruataniwha Dam, and that opportunity was taken away from them. They're operating legally. They're operating in a framework that, rightly or wrongly, is backing their position today. And I don't know what else they're going to put up. Who knows what the Taskforce is going to throw up for voluntary change in the way they do things and the way they think. But I do know that if they don't have a little bit of wriggle room and a bit of breathing space, nothing really is going to happen that's going to be long-term and worthwhile. So I am going to vote for this, and I do think it's a prudent request, pragmatic request to give some people in their community some time to work through all these issues and find a way through, as our chair said at the start, a challenging situation.
Jenny, then Paul.
Kia ora. I am going to vote for this, and I do take exception that the community are bending over for this. It's actually the only form of collectivity where we can look after everyone except the small group that you're talking about, Tom. At the end of the day, they're on a resource consent, first in, first serve. We can't control that. But we can have a voice, and we can engage and participate with them and everybody else that it's affected by through this process. So I believe in the process, and that is distinctly the difference between this year and last year. And it's through no fault of Central Hawke's Bay that we are in this position, actually. It's through all the regulators. All the politicians put us in this place where we have real issues. So I'm supporting this because I think that we should give my home the time to try and sort this mess out that was brought on by others. Kia ora.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of things. One is this Water Taskforce group is not like TANK because it hasn't been mandated by the Regional Planning Committee, which TANK has. We've undertaken to take the findings of TANK on board. It is not the same that we've done with this particular group. I'm concerned that we have yet to see the surface water conservation plan, which is, I think, is a real key to the ongoing viability of what's happening down in Central Hawke's Bay. So in that respect, I find this particular request premature. I think we should have seen that so we get a really good idea of just what the community is planning to resolve these issues themselves and what value the two-year delay in implementing Plan Change 6, which has been a perfectly good plan change apparently. So there we go. I'm also concerned, at the end of the day, this is a deal. We've been offered a deal to delay the implementation of the minimum flow for the Tranche 2 water being publicly notified. I find that, if that's a deal, I find that, and I think it is a deal, but I find it really poor. I think it's unimaginative, and I don't think it does enough to really help things out. I think if they're serious about this, the Tranche 2 applicants could actually withdraw their applications for Tranche 2 water, so that part of the plan change can be that we actually take Tranche 2 out of Plan Change 6 so we don't have that problem ever again in the future. But to allow that to happen, the applicants have to withdraw their application. So there's one thing they can consider. The other one is that it does nothing to help the residents. I don't see anything where it helps the residents of Onga and Tukituki in terms of their wells, which were once perfectly satisfactory, now becoming unsatisfactory. I think that's an appalling situation for those communities to be in because of the irrigators taking all the water out of the aquifer and the aquifer level of the aquifer dropping. So part of a deal that I think could be made is that perhaps the irrigators could put their hands in their pockets and recompense those the residents of Onga and Tukituki for the costs that they have incurred because of what they've been doing, even though it is legal. That's beside the point. I think there's a moral and ethical obligation to help out your community where you've caused an effect. So I'll be voting against this proposition at this time for those reasons. Thank you.
I have a question. I know it's talking time, but I did have a question about voting. Because I do have I hear Jenny and I want to support the local tangata whenua if that's what they want to do, but I have a real reservation about this proposal. I have lots of reservations about it, but in particular that we've already been through a process and now we are going back to rehash some of it around the timeframes. I hear the concerns, but I still really have reservations about this precedent that we're setting to be able to do that. My question is, I guess to Leanne in terms of the governance and the rules, what is the effect of abstaining on the council vote? 80% to pass a resolution, is that 80% of those voting? And if you abstain, are you not counted in the vote?
That's the answer.
So you can abstain and it's 80% of those who actually vote. Can I just check that with you?
Yes, that's correct.
Debbie, we're going to put this in because Tora's got to go and we lose our quorum when Tora goes.
Debbie's asked to speak.
Yeah, Debbie.
Just to point about clarification there, Chair, that Leanne, in the notes here it goes, or failing consensus, the agreement of 80% of the committee members present and voting. will be required.
Yep.
So that means that the and voting bit means that those that abstain, okay.
And not voted.
Then you have the last, because we've got to come back on this.
Voters, they abstain. So
We have to vote on it. Until all parties have been heard from, before all meeting.
Well,
Sorry?
anyone else want to speak?
We won't lose quorum.
Peter wants to speak?
We're well off to today, but if we lose too many people, we will lose quorum.
Okay, Debbie, then Peter.
Well, how many can we lose, please?
Well, we can get down to 14.
We're at 16 now.
We've got 16, so we're going to lose 2.
Okay, we're fine. Debbie, and then Peter.
Alex, I'd like to thank you for showing the leadership that you have been voted in and well deserved in terms of representing our community today. And Jenny, I'd like to acknowledge you as holding the mana whenua from Central Hawke's Bay. Also Mike and Tora, I'd like to thank you for opening up the window to bring this discussion back to the table. When we received this report on the Māori World View last RPC meeting from Ricky, and he was explaining the basic philosophies, and one of them was a phase-in over time to allow existing users to adjust. And the length of transition time is critical to avoid shocks by allowing existing users to adapt. And also the importance of community and iwi determining objectives within plan changes. This, Rex, you're quite right, this situation for Central Hawke's Bay has been incredibly challenging, and history, I mean, we're looking forward, we're managing for the future, not the past. So Ruataniwha is what it is. But in terms of managing for the past, I know each and every one of us are here looking to be managing for the social, cultural, environmental and economic values. And goodness me, I could almost pick the first part of Tom's lovely speech this morning and repeat it now, because the precedent, what you said there this morning is applicable to here, right here and now. We had a tank process that's has been progressing over 6 years. The Tuki catchment got a board of inquiry process served up over 3 weeks, and we've got so much new science. We're working incredibly hard as a community through a Tuki Taskforce, and you've seen some of the complexities of it. We've only had 3 meetings, and already we have local representatives from Forest and Bird being overruled by their national body. I mean, those are some of the challenges that we're going to have as we work out how we're going to operate as a community. But one thing is very, very clear, that if we're all there together as a community, we have a much better chance of getting positive outcomes from an environmental and a social and a cultural and an economic aspect than if we're all working as individuals. So I think that in terms of 3 meetings, the progress we're making is in terms of a task force and coming along and bringing the community views on the way are really, really goodness me, they are just amazing, because it took probably about 2 years for the stakeholder group in Ruataniwha to make progress like that. I like the fact that the science program is getting an overhaul. Jenny, you said Papa Tuanukunuku is going to get a scan. You know, that's fantastic. We learn science is evolving all of the time. So the scan, that's going to tell us, it's going to throw up a whole lot of potential, you know, whether tranche 2 is even viable or not. We don't know what's underground, and this scan's going to give us a far greater understanding. In terms of tranche 2, I know there is a lot of angst in our community about it, and I wonder, you know, we don't know what the science is going to throw up for that, so I'm very happy to let that take its course. But I wonder what it would look like if we discovered that tranche 2, instead of being our worst threat to the community, actually became one of our greatest opportunities. Because what if, hypothetically, the scan showed up that there are confined aquifers at a deeper space, and that some of those tranche 2 applicants were actually going to come off tranche 1, and then there was going to be a relief put in the system. We just don't know. In terms of the Ongatiko and the community issues there, and Councillor Bailey's raised some very realistic options, which I'm sure will be discussed in time, but what we're looking to do is actually make sure we're dealing with facts in those communities, and so there's no need to be getting too upset until we know exactly what we're dealing with. If we're dealing with bores that haven't had any maintenance on them for 30 years, well, then perhaps it is the responsibility of the property owners to be addressing that. Let's just find out what's going to go there. In terms of Councillor Balford's concerns around the Tuki, and he's not happy about relaxing on water quality, nor am I, and I don't think anybody around this table is. This discussion today is about water quantity, not water quality. So I'd like to give some reassurances there. But just in closing, look, this is about the river and this is about the community, and once again, thanks to Alex, because we're asking for a little bit of time, and it's really important.
As a second, can I ask that
Chair, I was going to make
be put? I'm going to go.
Yes, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman, I can't afford to lose time.
I have the floor, thank you, Alan. In the interests of time, I was going to make a speech, but the previous one went on so long.
Sorry.
I will not do so in the interest of getting on with the vote.
Thank you, Peter. Greatly appreciate that. Okay, we've got a motion before us, unless we've got someone else wants a desperate. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against?
No.
It's carried.
Show of hands.
Show of hands.
What are we showing?
Favour.
In favour. Pani is voting in favour?
Voting.
Yeah, Tane's voting.
Voting as he's leaving.
And against?
Voting with his feet.
Against? All those against? Your two. Motion is carried.
Mr. Chairman, I abstained.
You abstained?
I did.
You abstained?
I did.
Abstention.
Still
Rare thing for me to do, but I couldn't bring myself to vote for it.
But Mr. Chairman, I have to run away because as much as I'm in prestigious company, I have 3 daughters who have their end of year prize giving, who are, in this instance, are more prestigious than you.
Yeah, no,
Family
they
first.
always
What do you
are
mean
more
this
prestigious.
They're always more prestigious.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, we're going to item 12.
So that was carried, Mr. Chairman, wasn't it?
It's carried.
Carried, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, because so we're going straight to item 12.
So I'm going to invite Mr. Ide.
Over it, I think it's ready to roll.
We did 12 and 13. Taking as read questions, I don't know. Well, particular things you want to
point to, or are you happy to take them as read? So we're happy to have the papers taken as read unless...
Yeah, I think that'd be really good. Thanks for that.
So items 12 and 13.
12 and 13, so we're taking 12 and 13 as read.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Technical question. What time does this council run its time so it's finished?
Well, yeah, that's a really interesting thing, isn't it? Because...
Started at 9 a.m.
Two separate meetings.
Two separate meetings. I thought of that, Rick, but...
Are we on overtime now?
Double time, mate.
That's why we're saying they're taken as read.
Yeah.
Then we can go.
So we're taking 12 and 13 together. They're both just...
13 is read.
They're just to receive. Are there any questions on them, Peter?
I have 15 questions.
Do you?
I just want to ask a question, given on this nightmare, which is this outstanding water bodies flange.
That was the question I was going to ask.
Somebody's throats. Can you tell me if we ever actually determine what an outstanding water body is, or which ones we are prepared to support in Hawke's Bay, does it afford any extra protection to those water bodies?
No one knows.
The National Policy Statement for Freshwater says, it will get some extra legislative protection for whatever those outstanding and significant values are.
Supplementary question. If we declared the Tukituki River an outstanding water body, what extra protection will it get in the light of today's decision?
We would have to develop
Be provocative here.
policies and rules and methods to give effect to the outstanding nature of the values. So the extent of protection is then a subsequent thing that has to be given effect to within the RRMP, correct?
So if it's outstanding for, I don't know, whitewater kayaking, which is not, then you'd need to make sure that the values, the factors that make it outstanding for whitewater kayaking are protected. If it's outstanding for, what's another one? Trout angling.
Which it is.
Yep, you'd need to make sure that your planning provisions protect those factors that make it outstanding for angling. But it doesn't mean that everything has to be protected within that one water body.
But it's probably also true that a lot of those characteristics would be protected under, let's say, a plan change anyway, for instance, the tank plan change. So I've got a second question.
We've got to identify the values and provide...
I'm sorry, I have a second question, because this is just an ongoing nightmare, and I'm really upset that we've spent so much money shagging around with it and got absolutely nowhere. I want to know whether any other unitary or regional councils have actually managed to complete this process, or are they all floundering like us?
No, Gisborne has.
To complete, certainly I'm aware that Gisborne District Council, a unitary authority, has gone out with a proposed plan and submissions and whatnot. In their proposed plan, they had listed single figures of outstanding water bodies. I can't recall the exact number. Let's say 3 or 4. So they've made a good attempt at it. To complete it and come out the other end of Environment Court challenges and whatnot, that remains to be seen. Who else is there? Canterbury, I think, are having a go through their zone-based plan changes.
Are you on item 12 or 13, Peter?
It's item 12, I think.
He's on item overtime.
Look,
And certainly others are watching our actions and activities with great interest.
And I just note that had we decided to do it on a catchment basis, so do it within the tank plan change, it would have been a damn sight easier because it'd be part of an integrated package. And the mistake we made is that we'd do a standalone plan change on this. In
Do we have
hindsight.
anyone who will move?
Alan moved ages ago.
Sorry, Alan moved. Do we have a seconder? Rickers.
Yes, second.
Second.
With alacrity.
Do you wish to speak, Alan?
No.
Rick, do you wish to speak?
No.
Does anyone else except Peter wish to speak? Peter, do you wish to speak?
I don't wish to speak, Chair.
Okay, all those in favour of the recommendation to receive that report, thank you. Item 13, which is Gavin again. We sort of discussed it.
We'll take it as read.
I thought we were doing
we did both
of them already.
Both at the same time.
No, but I decided to go back because I was...
But you accepted his motion, so I moved both. I seconded both. We're done.
We're done.
Apart from minor items.
Minor items.
Unconsented
The union
feedlots.
knows how to push things along when they...
Yes, that's exactly right.
Liz is here for unconsented feedlots.
Well, I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just wondering if we could have a bit of an update on the feedlot situation.
You don't want it now?
No, feedlot situation throughout Hawke's Bay. I think it would be useful to come back to this committee to give us an update on what's happening. That's all. That was my only request.
That's a follow-up?
That's a follow-up, yeah.
No, that's fine. I mean, I'll just give you a very brief...
We're not here to debate this. This is...
We do fly areas where we know that there are feedlots every year, and we check those areas and look to see if there are others that we aren't aware of. And for example, this year we found a couple and sent the compliance officers up the driveways and advised them that they needed to get consent, and you know, they've made applications. So if we see something in the course of that activity, or we're advised of one or potentially of one, we'll follow it up.
Okay, I'd like to understand what was happening.
Yeah, sure.
Is that south of Napier or north?
Both. He's talking about a particular feedlot, actually. Okay, the next one, independent advice. Who was that?
That was me.
Oh, you again, Peter.
So this is in relation to a resolution that was passed by Council, I think maybe a month or 2 months ago now, in relation to the fact that all independent advice to members of this committee that was funded by the Regional Council should be available to all committees, to all committee members. And I asked our co-chair, Toro, to follow up with the Tangata Whenua members, and he has done so, and he was going to report on the outcome of that discussion here today, but he's gone. So I'm wondering if someone else can give us an update on that matter. Maybe the deputy chair.
Sorry, could you just repeat, what did you ask from the chair, Peter?
I was seeking clarity around Tangata Whenua's position on the council's resolution that all independent advice that was funded from the council would be available to all members of this committee, which it currently is not.
Okay, so please step in, Tangata Whenua members, if I get this wrong. But my understanding is the Tangata Whenua members have agreed to provide advice that's received by the Tangata Whenua members from their independent advisors to the councillors, or to, I think it was James and Rex, have been sent the advice that was received last time. I think we sent it to you shortly after our meeting, the Tangata Whenua hui.
That was circulated last night.
That's been done already from yesterday's meeting. I think it may have been already. I think James and Richie received the advice. So I understand we have complied with the direction of council to do so.
So it will now be in order for councillors to attend those meetings where that advice is received and discussed?
No. So we've been meeting, and I'm not sure why this is an issue now, Peter, but for the 5 years that I have been on this committee, the Tangata Whenua reps have met the day prior to discuss our issues or our concerns, to go over the papers, and that's been supported by council, who have had staff there when we've requested that, and council has funded independent advisors to support us in reviewing the papers with the help of our advisors. So those meetings are for the Tangata Whenua to discuss the advice that's received on that day, and when we receive the advice, we're happy to provide that advice, the written advice, to the council. I think it's important that Tangata Whenua can meet and discuss things, ask their stupid questions or whatever during that meeting. I don't think it's conducive to the Tangata Whenua feeling at ease and having a robust discussion amongst themselves for councillors to be there. That's what we do when we meet on days like today.
Yeah, so I have to agree to disagree with you on that. I think that you are effectively creating two committees when there is only one, and it is my view that everybody on this committee should be receiving the same advice and have the same opportunities to question the people that supply that advice. So I just have to completely disagree with you.
After we've received it, and I could talk to Billy and Ricky and to James Palmer about, if you have questions about the advice that's received, then maybe Billy and Ricky can answer it during the RPC meeting.
Huffy, you had a...
Oh, my minor item?
Yeah, you drifted off, haven't you, on me?
Oh,
Andy.
I didn't think we were finished, actually.
We have...
Oh, okay.
Tuna. Andy here.
Oh, great. On to it.
Tuna.
Just to report back, we had 20 endangered species and a number of fish pass away as a result of a localised water contamination issue, which was unidentified at the time, a month and a half ago. So I'm just looking for an update on what do we know so far around the cause and effect of those poisonings, or those deaths, rather.
Those deaths, yeah. And so I don't. You might not be very satisfied after I'm finished, but I'll give it my best.
Haven't got long.
So real quickly, the compliance team did some analyses, and this is a page of chemicals that could have been responsible, and none of them were in the water. Looking at the water quality in general, it's I mean, you'll know the county drain's not a particularly pristine system, and there was nothing that stood out as being potentially linked to the eel deaths in terms of comparing upstream and downstream. But when you look at upstream and downstream, it's not that surprising that you might get fish kills in that waterway, just with the chemistry of the water and the conditions that are being experienced. And so what we really struggle with in terms of fish kills is identifying with a lot of confidence the cause of death. And so we're not going to be able to do that in this instance either. They're often quite transient events, and if you're not there at the time, collecting information at the time, it's very difficult to go back and piece together what may have happened. And in that case, there could be a variety of reasons. There was a little bit of rain before that may have flushed a lot of organic material into the stream, had a bit of a momentary reduction in oxygen that was enough to tip them over. in these streams, the ammonia levels are quite high, combined with warm water and, again, a bit more organic material. That might be enough for ammonia toxicity and that, that process to occur, which is very hard to catch, and it's also very hard to diagnose from the actual bodies that you collect. So in terms of, this not being very satisfactory by way of an explanation, what I think is good to focus on is that there's a lot of work being done to try to set these systems up so that they're not in such poor condition. So rather than trying to react and chase our tails when we find these dead fish, the broader picture of trying to improve things like riparian planting, working with the Napier City Council in this case to clean up the stormwater, that broader approach of trying to proactively make these conditions better for fish is probably a good thing to focus on, rather than being, trying to go back in time and guess what happened in this particular instance. That'd be my take.
Thank you, Andy. It's not great. We have eels can survive in the most amazing poor conditions. So if it's bad enough to kill eels, it's pretty bad.
Thank you. So the situation is too many variables for us to be able to determine what the cause was, but your recommendation around looking towards the joint working group between Napier City and HBRC with regards to the ongoing care and maintenance of the stormwater and the open drains within Napier.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you. I'd follow up, not necessarily today, but I'd love to hear the perspective of HBRC and their staff around how that how effective that relationship is, and where perhaps we could gain some advantages in that space in order to protect species within those less than ideal waterways. Kia ora.
Thank you, Api. Thank you, Andy, for coming along. And thank you for everybody, especially the councillors who have been here since 9 o'clock. It's been a bit of a journey. No, sorry. It's been a bit of a journey getting through. And so, Patty, if you would please close our meeting for us, I'd really appreciate it.
I just wanted to reflect back on when we started at 1 o'clock today, and we talked about integrity in terms of honesty, forgiveness, openness and transparency. And we talked about under synergy around cooperation, collaboration, collectiveness, and about peace, progress and prosperity. And so I just wanted to say that if my auntie had been here, then she would be happy to close this meeting. But I'm also aware that we have a regional council meeting next week, but for tangata whenua. We won't see you again, possibly until, most of you, until the new year. And so on behalf of the Chair and on behalf of Council and this Regional Planning Committee, I wanted to say to you these words in terms of the pathways ahead of you and the festive season that you will share with your families. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pauna me te moana. That may the calm be widespread in front of you. May the oceans and the pathways before you glisten like that of greenstone. Kia tere tere te kārohi rohi kai muarai tō huarahi. And may the shimmer of sun light up and dance across the pathways ahead of you as you speed quickly, swiftly to your families and to your destination. Ko tō hoa haere, ko te rangi Māori e. And may your encounterance along that pathway to all people be peace and goodwill. And if we turn to everybody participated in this morning. And I know it was Toro's wish that we finish this one here, particularly for down in Central Hawke's Bay, that we pray for dampness as it ascends upon. And I'm going to go through the left-hand side, and if you would join me on both sides, we're going to finish on the right-hand side. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kiuta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hia ke ana te atakura, he teo, he huka, he hauhu, tihei mauri ora, cease the winds from the west, cease the winds from the south. Let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean. Let the red-tipped dawn come with a sharpened ear, a touch of frost, a promise of a glorious day. Tēnā tata.
Kia ora, me te koutou.
Ai, hei mana.
Come and get my present.